It is Monday Night Mock Draft here on Johnny Talk Sports. And this is my fourth mock draft of the mock draft season. We are getting closer and closer until draft night. We are also getting closer until the start of free agency. And there is a lot that can still happen from now until draft night that can have a huge impact on the NFL draft. So without further ado, let's get to my NFL mock draft 4.0. With the first overall pick, the Jaguars go with Trevor Lawrence, the quarterback out of Clemson. The Jaguars get their franchise quarterback. We know that Trevor Lawrence will be drafted first overall. So this is the easiest part of the NFL draft and the easiest part of the mock draft. The bigger question for the Jaguars going into draft night is what will they do with their second first round pick? Because the Jaguars, they also have the Rams first round pick in this year's NFL draft from the Jalen Ramsey trade. So there are possibly two different scenarios that the Jaguars can do with their second first round pick, which I will get to a little bit later on. But this is where the real NFL draft begins, is with the Jets at pick number 2. Because the Jets, they have different options. They can go with Zach Wilson. They can go with Justin Fields. They can go with PENEI SEWELL out of Oregon. See, those are the three different options that I think the Jets can have. I mean, they have a lot of options as well, but I think these are the three most realistic. And I think it depends on what they're going to do with Sam Darnold. There's been no word yet, although it's been rumored that he has had some offers. Hopefully we find something out within these next few weeks. But I think that the Jets are going to want a quarterback of their own. And I think they'll go with Zach Wilson out of BYU. Now the Jets, I think they have the right guy as their head coach in Robert Saleh. And I think he has what it takes to rebuild this Jets franchise. But if I were a Jets fan, my biggest fear is Robert Saleh being Dan Quinn 2.0, where he has one phenomenal season, one average season, which at least resulted in a playoff appearance, and below average the rest of his tenure. But I think this can be a good start to rebuilding the Jets franchise. But if they decide to keep Sam Darnold, PENEI SEWELL, I think, will be the pick. But for right now, it's Zach Wilson. Hopefully we get a word on Sam Darnold within these next few weeks. That way we can at least try to anticipate what the Jets could do with the second overall pick. But if they were to trade Sam Darnold, I would imagine they'd get some more draft capital as well, which would be very important for a rebuild. The Dolphins with the third overall pick, a big decision to make. Do they go with PENEI SEWELL, the top offensive tackle in this draft class, or do they go with DeVonta Smith, the Heisman Trophy winner? Or do they go with Jamar Chase? I think those are three realistic possibilities. But I think they're going to go with PENEI SEWELL. I've been saying in previous mock drafts that DeVonta Smith reuniting with Tua would make Tua a much better quarterback. But I just think when you have PENEI SEWELL, the best offensive tackle prospect that I've personally ever seen, I just don't know if the Dolphins, if they want to pass on that, building protection for Tua Tagovailoa. Because they could honestly get another wide receiver later on in this first round. Because the Dolphins, they also have the 18th overall pick. Now this third overall pick is the Texans pick. And I think they're going to go with PENEI SEWELL. I think just go with what I think would be the best player available at this point in the draft. And we'll see what the Dolphins will do with this next first round pick. Which, if they were to go with SEWELL, I would anticipate they'd go wide receiver at pick 18. Next, we have the Falcons with the fourth pick. I have them going with Justin Fields, the quarterback out of the Ohio State University. Now, Ohio State quarterbacks, they don't do well in the NFL. But I think out of all of them, I think Justin Fields has potential to break that curse. Especially if he gets to learn under Matt Ryan for a couple of seasons and then be the starter maybe 2 seasons from now. Because you just never know when you'll have an opportunity to draft a quarterback this high in the draft again. And I know the Falcons, it's rumored that they aren't going to move Matt Ryan or Julio Jones at any point in this offseason. You just never know. It could just be a complete smokescreen. But I think the Falcons with Justin Fields, I still think it's a solid pick for the Falcons. I mean, Matt Ryan is going to be around forever. He's going to retire eventually. So I think it's best to get your next quarterback, the successor to Matt Ryan. And I think Justin Fields has potential. But can Justin Fields break that curse of Ohio State quarterbacks not doing well in the National Football League? With pick number 5, I have the Bengals with Ja'Marr Chase, the wide receiver out of LSU. And I think with Ja'Marr Chase reuniting with Joe Burrow, it's to make the Bengals a much better team. And I would anticipate that Ja'Marr Chase, I think he'll actually, believe it or not, if he were to be on the Bengals, he would probably be at least top 10 in receiving yards. I think Joe Burrow will trust him that much that he can be a top 10 receiver in the league. And it can make Joe Burrow a much better quarterback as well. Because Joe Burrow, he did really well in his rookie season until he suffered the season-ending injury. But Ja'Marr Chase and Joe Burrow, they trust each other. They won a national championship at LSU. And I think this is an A-plus pick for the Bengals, if that is the direction that they go in. And I think it will be with PENEI SEWELL off the board. The 6th pick belongs to the Eagles, and I'm going with DeVonta Smith, the wide receiver out of Alabama. Now, with the way the draft is going at this point, the Eagles will have an opportunity to draft Trey Lance. But the last quarterback they drafted from North Dakota State, he had a really good season in 2017. I'd say underappreciated the more that you think about it. I mean, Sewell's off the board, which I think the biggest problem with the Eagles is the offensive line. Because the Eagles defense, it's night and day. One game, the Eagles defense could be phenomenal, and maybe the next 2 or 3 games, it's just completely atrocious. Then it does really solid, then it's atrocious again, then it's phenomenal for about 2 or 3 games. But Sewell's off the board. I think it's too early to draft a RASHAWN SLATER or a Christian DARRISAW. But the Eagles, they could also maybe trade up. They can trade the 6th pick and move up to 2 or 3 and take Justin Fields or Zach Wilson, which they can also include that 2nd-round pick from the Carson Wentz trade, because that is in all likelihood going to become a 1st-round pick. But I think with what the Eagles were doing, other than trading Carson Wentz, they've released Deshaun Jackson and they've released Alshon Jeffrey. And the Eagles, they haven't really had a number 1 receiver for Carson Wentz. Now, whether the quarterback's going to be Jalen Hurts or it's going to be a quarterback they get in this offseason, whether it's the draft or signing a free agent or trading for a quarterback, you need to have them have a go-to receiver. And this go-to receiver, DeVonta Smith, the Heisman Trophy winner, you know he's going to make plays right away. This is a great pick for the Eagles. Next, we have the Lions on the clock, and I have them with Jalen Waddle out of Alabama, with Marvin Jones and Kenny Golladay being free agents. One of them is obviously going to go, because the Lions, they can only franchise tag one of them. Marvin Jones was rumored to want to play for the Rams with Matthew Stafford, so you can only franchise tag Marvin Jones or Kenny Golladay. But I personally think that they're going to put the franchise tag on Golladay. Now, Golladay missed most of the season with an injury, But I think Kenny Golladay is the best receiver on the Lions team. And I think you got to compliment Golladay with a wide receiver. And I think Jalen Waddle, this could be maybe a Robert Woods type receiver for Jared Goff going into 2021. Now, a wide receiver I think is the biggest need for the Lions. Although their defense isn't that good, and I've had them going with Patrick Surtain in the last mock draft. I just think that when you have a chance to take a wide receiver, especially with Chase and Smith going off the board back to back, I think you need to take Jalen Waddle. Next, we have the Panthers on the clock. Now I'm going with Trey Lance, the quarterback out of North Dakota State. Now, this pick, it does seem realistic, but I'm just not quite sure if this is actually going to be the pick here, because it's been rumored that the Panthers are the leading favorite to land Deshaun Watson by trading 3 first-round picks to get Deshaun Watson. Now, this is just in case that the Panthers, they end up don't land Deshaun Watson at the end of the day. Because I think the 3 teams that are in this race for Deshaun Watson are the Panthers, the Jets, and the Dolphins. But I think the Jets could be the team to land Deshaun Watson at the end of the day. Because I personally think if the Jets want Deshaun Watson, they'll get him. Because I think they have the most to offer out of all of these teams. Because the Jets, they can really offer those 2 first-round picks they have. And then another first and then maybe another second. The Panthers, I feel like if they want Deshaun Watson, they're going to have to trade away Christian McCaffrey. Because I would anticipate that the Texans would at least want McCaffrey. Although that would kind of really not make any sense considering the Texans, they already have David Johnson making, $15 million a year. But the Panthers go with Trey Lance. Moving on to pick number 9, the Broncos with Patrick Surtain, the cornerback out of Alabama. The Broncos secondary really struggled this season, and I think the best way to make that secondary better is to get the best corner in this draft class, and that is Patrick Surtain. Patrick Surtain has the potential to be that lockdown corner that teams dream of having. I think when you have the opportunity, when the opportunity strikes, I think you have to take it. You can't pass on the opportunity from someone like Patrick Surtain. So that's where I think the Broncos will go in that direction. Although with Von Miller expected to not be a Bronco going into 2021 because I believe they're not going to renew the 5th year of his deal. Or whatever the situation is, maybe the pick here could be Micah Parsons, a linebacker at Penn State. But I think Surtain here, I think it's a smart pick for the Broncos. Next, we have the Cowboys. I am going with Rashawn Slater, the offensive tackle of Northwestern. Now, the Cowboys, I think they need to start rebuilding that offensive line. Because there was a point where the Cowboys had the best offensive line in the league. And the way they did that is they would draft an offensive lineman in the first round consistently. And I think that it can protect Dak and can build better running lanes for Zeke moving forward by going with Rashawn Slater. Now, maybe this could be considered a reach, but I really don't think so. I think this is a pick that could be worth it for the Cowboys. Although I think their top need is a cornerback, I think with Surtain being off the board, I really don't think they would take a chance on Caleb Farley or J.C. Horn. So I think they'd just go with Rashawn Slater to make the offensive line better than it has been in recent memory. Next, we have the Giants. I think with Micah Parsons, a linebacker out of Penn State. Now, in my last mock draft, I had Micah Parsons falling to pick number 30. And there was a comment on my last mock draft saying that teams will pass on Micah Parsons because of the rumors from last year. And what that commenter was referring to was there was a rumor at Penn State that allegedly there was a fight involving Micah Parsons, and James Franklin told one of the other players, although I'm not sure if that player was a part of that fight that was involving Micah Parsons, but he said to not talk to the police and don't answer the police's questions. So allegedly Micah Parsons was in this fight at Penn State. And it could be possible that teams will pass on Micah Parsons because of it. Maybe not necessarily. I just think Micah Parsons has top 10, maybe top 7, or as high as top 5 talent as far as this draft class. But I think the Giants, they make this pick because last season they had a chance to go with Isaiah Simmons with the 4th overall pick, but they took Andrew Thomas instead to build a better offensive line. I think the Giants redeemed themselves by taking the best linebacker in the draft class this year, in Micah Parsons. Next, we have the 49ers on the clock, and they will go with Caleb Farley, the corner out of Virginia Tech. Now, this is a pick mainly because it's expected that the 49ers and Richard Sherman will part ways at some point in this offseason. And the 49ers are honestly just a few pieces away from getting back to the Super Bowl. And I think Caleb Farley, I think he's the answer to one of those missing puzzle pieces. I just think Caleb Farley, he's got potential to be a lockdown corner as well with Patrick Surtain and even J.C. Horn, who's going to get drafted, at least do I have getting drafted in the next couple of picks. Now, it depends on what the 49ers will do with the quarterback position. Do they stick with Jimmy Garoppolo, or do they trade for Sam Darnold? That is a possibility as well. But despite Jimmy Garoppolo having a few injuries throughout his tenure with the 49ers, I feel like you can't deny what Jimmy Garoppolo did in 2019. Now, I know he did get carried by the running game and defense at some points in the season, but Jimmy Garoppolo did really well. I mean, despite a couple of injuries during his tenure, I just think that he's worth keeping around for the long run. I think it's best to start by building some of those pieces, trying to find those missing pieces to get back to the Super Bowl. And I think Caleb Farley, I think he's one of those pieces. Next, we have the Chargers, and I'm going with Christian DARRISAW, the offensive tackle out of Virginia Tech. And this pick may not be an exciting one if you're a Chargers fan. Although I could see this pick maybe being Kyle Pitts, depending on if he re-signs with the Chargers. Now, if he does, this could be the pick easily. But if he doesn't, maybe we can see it being Kyle Pitts, knowing that Kyle Pitts is still on the board at this point in the draft. But I think this pick, build protection for Justin Herbert, the Rookie of the Year, much deserved, although you can make an argument for Justin Jefferson. A really good season for Justin Herbert. And I think the Chargers, they'll re-sign Hunter Henry, mainly because Herbert likes Hunter Henry. Like, he targets him a lot, and he is one of the top targets in this Chargers offense with Justin Herbert under center. So I think with this pick, may not be exciting, but I think it's a pick that's going to be well worth it moving forward as it provides protection for Justin Herbert, your franchise quarterback. Next, we have the Vikings on the clock. And I think going with ALIJAH VERA-TUCKER out of USC. The Vikings, I think, need to build around their offensive line. Build better running lanes for Dalvin Cook. Provide protection for Kirk Cousins. And we're starting to see these offensive linemen start going off the board. Because we have had, within the last few picks, Rashawn Slater and Christian DARRISAW come off the board. I think the Vikings, I think they're going to address their needs on the offensive line while they're at it. Because I think that's really their biggest need at this point. I mean, they didn't really do that good in defensively wise last year. I mean, they had some really young corners, but I just think the offensive line, I think that's a more important area within this Vikings team. Next, we have the Patriots on the clock. I have the Patriots going with Kyle Pitts, the tight end out of Florida. Kyle Pitts. Now, I know the Patriots drafted 2 tight ends in last year's draft, but Kyle Pitts isn't just a tight end. He can also play wide receiver. He can line up at wide receiver. And I think with Kyle Pitts still on the board, Bill Belichick is just salivating over the opportunity to draft the best tight end in this draft class. Maybe one of the best tight ends that we've seen in recent memory. And I think Bill Belichick, he takes the opportunity. He doesn't pass on Kyle Pitts. Next, we have the Cardinals going with JC Horn, the cornerback out of South Carolina, and Patrick Peterson in the Cardinals. They're expected to part ways this offseason. So I think the best way to replace Patrick Peterson is to take a corner. And with JC Horn on the board and the Cardinals, they just find their successor for Patrick Peterson. JC Horn, I think, is one of the more underrated prospects in this draft class. And I think he can have an immediate impact with this Cardinals defense. Next, we have the Raiders, and I'm going with KWITY PAYE, the edge rusher out of Michigan. Now, the Raiders, they could be in contention for J.J. Watt, although I don't think so, because I think J.J. Watt will want to sign with a contender. And right now, I don't think the Raiders, they're getting close to being a legitimate contender. But I think with KWITY PAYE still on the board, I'd say one of probably a top 10 prospect here. I think he's underrated, undervalued. And John Gruden, he loves defensive players. And I think he's going to want KWITY PAYE in this situation. Next, we have the Dolphins. With the 18th pick, the Miami Dolphins. And the answer to the question is yes, I think they go wide receiver here. And they go with Rashod Bateman, the wide receiver out of Minnesota. Now, Rashod Bateman, he opted out of the 2020 college football season pretty early in the Big Ten season. And I think Bateman, I think this could be a steal if you're the Dolphins. I think Bateman has at least maybe top 10 talent here. And the Dolphins are going to give him a pick 18. And that is the go-to receiver for Tua Tagovailoa. I mean, you could take Smith at number 3 and then go offensive tackle with pick 18. But I just think with the way offensive tackles were going, probably too early to kind of reach on a Jalen Mayfield or Samuel Cosmi or a Wyatt Davis or a Tevin Jenkins. But Bateman, the number 1 receiver moving forward for the Dolphins. Pick number 19, I have the Washington football team going with Alex Leatherwood, the offensive tackle out of Alabama. And the Washington football team, I think their biggest need is the offensive line. And it's possible the Washington football team would want Mac Jones in this situation. But I'm just going off of the Washington football team wanting Alex Smith back in 2021, because it was said that they want him back in 2021. But Mac Jones would be the pick. But I just think building around your offensive line, making the offensive line better, I think that could be the objective the Washington football team wants to go. It's where they want to go with, and they'll go with Leatherwood. Next, we have the Bears. I'm going with Terrace Marshall Jr., the wide receiver out of LSU. With Allen Robinson hitting free agency, I think the Bears, they want to build a replacement for Allen Robinson and go with Terrace Marshall Jr. Terrace Marshall Jr., he was doing well in the 2020 season before he opted out, which I wouldn't blame him because LSU, it's not like they were in championship contention at all. And in 2019, he was overshadowed by Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. But Marshall had a good season that year. He had a good season for somebody that's getting overshadowed by two receivers. And where one of them could have had a legitimate argument to win Rookie of the Year. And the other one that could have an argument for Rookie of the Year if he indeed does go to the Bengals at pick number 5. So I think this is the biggest need for the Bears is wide receiver, because Allen Robinson, he was targeted pretty much with the Bears. I believe he was the most targeted receiver the Bears had this past season. And when you're losing that to free agency, I think it's important that you draft a wide receiver with your first round pick. Next, we have the Colts. I think with Teven Jenkins, the offensive tackle out of Oklahoma State. And the Colts, just a couple pieces away from being a Super Bowl contender. I think they got one step closer, maybe even a couple steps closer with Carson Wentz. But the Colts, they got to build a better offensive line here. I think they're going to go with Teven Jenkins. Maybe not an exciting pick if you're the Colts, but I think it's well worth it. Because I think Terrace Marshall Jr. probably could have been the pick, but he was off the board one pick earlier. I think the Colts, they can have a little bit of a need to really improve that offensive line. One of the better offensive lines in the league. And I think adding Teven Jenkins in the mix, that can make the offensive line a whole lot better. Especially when the Colts, they were becoming, to me, a typical run-first offense, and where you have Jonathan Taylor and Jordan Wilkins, and you have Nyheim Hines. In that backfield, it's best to build running lanes for all three of those backs. And who knows what they're going to do with Marlon Mack, although I think Marlon Mack will become a free agent. He'll sign somewhere else because he probably won't get the playing time that he feels like he deserves, because Jonathan Taylor really balled out in his rookie season. Next, we have the Titans. And I'm going to go with Gregory Rousseau, the edge rusher out of Miami. And the Titans, they need pass rush. What was it? They only had 19 sacks in 2020, the least amount in NFL history for a team that made the playoffs. Gregory Rousseau, I think he's top 15 value. And the Titans, they're getting to pick 22. So that is, in my mind, a massive steal for the Titans. Considering that edge rushing is what I think their biggest priority. I think Rousseau can make an immediate impact for this Titans defense. Next, we have the Jets. Now, this is the Seahawks' first-round pick from the Jamal Adams trade. I have him going with Kadarius Toney, the wide receiver out of Florida. Kadarius Toney, whether or not you're going with Zach Wilson, Justin Fields, or Sam Darnold, or Deshaun Watson, I could see that maybe the Jets could, if they're wanting to trade for Deshaun Watson, they might fight to the nail to keep this 23rd pick. Because they got to get a go-to receiver. And with Kadarius Toney on the board, I think with his speed and athleticism, that is what the Jets really want. Because I think Kadarius Toney, I think he could be a Robbie Anderson type receiver. And Robbie Anderson was doing quite well for the Jets. But he decided to leave them last season in free agency and sign with the Panthers. So I think their best choice of getting a Robbie Anderson type receiver is going with Kadarius Toney. Next, we have the Steelers on the clock. And I'm going to go with Najee Harris, the running back out of Alabama. Now, there was a report that the Jets, they had some interest in Najee Harris for the 23rd overall pick. And that could still be a possibility. But I just think that LaMichael P. Ryan, I think he can be a starting running back in the league. But Najee Harris, if he went to the Jets at 23, not bad either. But with James Conner expected to hit free agency, I just think with the Steelers have an opportunity to take Harris here with the 24th overall pick, and many suspect that Harris may not make it out of the top 20. The Steelers, this could be a home run pick for them. Although the Steelers really struggled on the offensive line last season, there could be maybe a diamond in the rough offensive tackle in the second round, or even later on in the draft. I think Najee Harris, if he were to land on the Steelers, maybe potential rookie of the year. Now, I'm not really sure if Benny Snell would be the running back one going into 2021. I think if they were to choose between Harris or Snell, they would probably go with Najee Harris, I think, at least in my mind. Next, we have the Jaguars, and this is their second first-round pick. And I have them with Jalen Mayfield, the offensive tackle out of Michigan, and this is a pick to protect Trevor Lawrence. And that is the objective at this point. You take your franchise quarterback with the first overall pick, and now when you have an opportunity to get protection for him with a second first-round pick, you don't pass on the opportunity. The Jaguars go with Jalen Mayfield. Next, we have the Browns on the clock, and I'm going with Jalen Phillips, the edge rusher out of Miami. The Browns, they had a phenomenal season in 2020. Made it to the playoffs for the first time in nearly 20 years. And seeing this Browns team, they could be maybe a few pieces away from being a legitimate contender. I think one of them is an edge rusher to complement Myles Garrett. And I think Jalen Phillips, underrated prospect. I just think with Jalen Phillips and Myles Garrett teaming up, that could be one of the best D lines in the league. I'd say maybe top 5. Because Jalen Phillips, he has the talent. And he did really well in his one season with Miami. Next, we have the Ravens, and they'll go with Trevon Moehrig, the safety out of TCU. Now, this pick, it may feel like a reach. But I think this could be a diamond in the rough pick to go with Trevon Moehrig. I'd say he is the best player available at this point in the draft. At least amongst their needs. Because the Ravens secondary, I think it's a pretty well-rounded secondary, but I think it's going to make the secondary a lot much better. Because considering that this could be a replacement for Earl Thomas, who didn't even play a snap for the Ravens in 2020, I think this is one of the biggest needs they need to address, and that is the safety position. Next, we have the Saints. I'm going with Asante Samuel Jr., the cornerback out of Florida State. Now, it's unknown whether or not Drew Brees will return for 2021 or not, or if Jameis Winston will be the starter. Could they go with Mac Jones with this pick? Thinking that Mac Jones could, if Mac Jones were to be a first-round pick, I think this is the ideal spot for him to be. Pick 20 to New Orleans. But I just think they're going to draft a corner here to complement Marshawn Lattimore. And I think Asante Samuel Jr., I think this is the right range for him. I think the right range for Asante Samuel is pick 27 to maybe pick 39. That is the perfect range, I think, for Asante Samuel. I think if you were to take Asante Samuel in the top 20, I think that could be considered a reach. But if you get him after pick 40, that's a massive steal in my mind. But the Saints, they address one of their bigger needs, and that is the secondary. Because the Saints defense, it wasn't as dominant throughout the entire season. There was one game where it was absolutely phenomenal. The next game it was flat. Then maybe a phenomenal game there. And then a really disastrous game on defense there. The Saints defense wasn't that consistent. And that is mostly because of the cornerback play. I think drafting Asante Samuel Jr., I think that can be an immediate fix for the Saints secondary. Next, we have the Packers on the clock, and I'm going to go with Rondale Moore, the wide receiver out of Purdue. Now, the Packers, they were rumored to want to trade for Will Fuller at the end of the trade deadline last season. But they didn't get him. And now they didn't draft T. Higgins in the first round last year instead of going with Jordan Love instead. I think they just don't make the same mistake 2 years in a row. They go with Rondale Moore. I think he can be their speed receiver. I would say Kadarius Toney, but Kadarius Toney is off the board. So their next best option for wide receiver, I think, is Rondale Moore. And Rondale Moore, he was, at his time in college football, one of the fastest, if not the fastest, in all of college football. And that is what you need when you're trying to compete against teams like the Saints or the Buccaneers. You need some speed. And Rondale Moore, he provides that. Pick number 30, I had the Bills going with Zaven Collins, linebacker of Tulsa. The Bills going with Zaven Collins. I think that this is a pick where it's just addressing one of the biggest needs they have left to becoming a legitimate contender. I mean, the Bills, they looked like a contender last season, but could that be just a one outlier season? For the Bills, I don't think so. I think addressing your need at linebacker with Zaven Collins, I think they get a steal here in Zaven Collins. Pick number 31, I had the Chiefs go with Wyatt Davis out of Ohio State. And we saw the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. Man, the Chiefs' offensive line didn't look good from start to finish. And I think the Chiefs, they really need to address the offensive line if they're going to want to win another Super Bowl. And I think Wyatt Davis, he's going to fit that bill nicely for Kansas City. Well, he would fit the bill nicely. I think that this could be an ideal pick for the Chiefs here in Wyatt Davis. Because offensive linemen in the Big Ten, they are really highly graded when it comes to draft season. And I think Wyatt Davis, I think this is an ideal spot for him. Because he did have the injury in the national championship game. But I don't think that's going to stop him from going outside the first round. I think the Chiefs take him towards the end of that first round. And finally, we have the 32nd pick. The Buccaneers going with Joseph Osai, the edge rusher out of Texas. What much you need to address if you're the Buccaneers? You have Brady coming back. You have Gronkowski coming back. Antonio Brown probably coming back. Chris Godwin most likely coming back. You have Sue and Levante David maybe coming back. But I think drafting Joseph Osai, I think that is really making a good defense a whole lot better. And I think Joseph Osai, I had him going to the Raiders at pick 17, I believe in my first mock draft. And now he's at 32 to the Buccaneers. So this could be a massive steal for the Buccaneers to make this team even better than it already is. And that is my NFL Mock Draft 4.0. Like, share, and subscribe. And I will talk to you next time.